Hi, welcome to Kyle's Easy Philosophy, where I try to make seemingly difficult philosophical dilemmas into. Fuck. Okay.
You can edit these videos, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to take this out. I said I was gonna do that last time and I didn't. Probably not gonna do it this time either. All right. Welcome to Kyle's Easy Philosophy, where I try to make seemingly. All right. Welcome to Kyle's Easy Philosophy, where I make seemingly difficult philosophical dilemmas easy enough for the average Joe to understand. There we go. Today's episode 2. Topic is interactionism, and we'll just hop right in. You can still see my screen, right?
Yes, I can.
All right, awesome. All right, so interactionism or interactionist dualism is the theory that the mind and matter are two distinct and independent substances that exert causal effects on one another. This is one type of dualism, traditionally a form of substance dualism, although more recently also sometimes a form of property dualism. And on the next slide, I have little explanations for property versus substance dualism, just to make sure everyone can understand the difference. So for property dualism, the physical substance would have the properties of being physical and then mental, where for substance dualism, we perceive two different substances, the mental or mind and physical or matter. Okay, so moving on. Interactionism was put forth by the French rationalist philosopher René Descartes, and Descartes claimed the body, being physical matter, was characterized by spatial extension, but not by thought and feeling, while the mind, being a separate substance, had no spatial extension, but could think and feel. Nevertheless, he maintained that the two interacted with one another, suggesting that this interaction occurred in the pineal gland of the brain. So I'd like to stop here and ask if you have any basic first thoughts on this, if you've heard of this before, or if you have any immediate reactions to this idea.
So actually a couple. First off, I've actually never heard of this this theory, but just kind of hearing what you said, it sounds pretty complicated, but it definitely does make sense. You have your physical qualities and you have your mind, and I know a lot of there's been a lot of question on whether the mind and body, you have the brain, you have the mind, and then you have the body, right? And we have all those things working together to create our perception of the world, ourselves, whatnot. So far it makes a little bit of sense.
All right, awesome.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to mention is you tried to, I'm not sure of the word, but you try to make distinct the brain and the body, but the brain is part of the body. So just for further down the line, we consider the brain to be part of the body in this view. All right, so we did that. So one significant defender of this philosophy is the philosopher of science, Karl Popper. He divided reality into three different worlds: the physical, the mental, and objective knowledge, all of which interact. So I have a picture on this next slide to kind of stimulate discussion. I think that at least what he's saying about the three different levels, I don't know if, what did he say it was? Objective knowledge is the right word. I think of that more as spirit and soul. But I think he's at least on the right track. I know a lot of different philosophers don't really see that the same way. Do you understand, or do you think that he's right in saying that?
As soon as you said objective knowledge, that was the only one I questioned, because yes, we understand that there are objective truths that I guess. Can we actually say if it's truth, if it's all just coming from humans and how we process and categorize data? can we actually say something is objective if we're the ones perceiving it and categorizing it?
I don't really think that's right. I don't think it's objective if it's our subjective like ideas on it.
Exactly.
So
Which made me question
I
that
think that
word.
term's a pretty. I think that's a pretty shitty term for what he's trying to describe. If
Yeah.
that's what he's trying to describe, he could be saying objective knowledge and really think that's it. When I think of that, it makes me think when he says objective knowledge, it makes me think of the mind part more than like anything else. And I don't think that's right because he's pretty much saying like, oh, physical, mind, and then mind again. I don't think that's three parts.
Hmm.
So one quick question, at least I just thought about right now, was if the mind affects the body and the body affects the mind, where does the spirit fit into this? Like, does the spirit just affect the mind, or does the spirit affect the body and then the body affects the mind? Or do you think that there's a certain way that it can go about? Like, it should go from red to green to blue, or blue to red to green, or
Well, all right. My head went a couple different ways. And bear with me. Sometimes I'm bad at explaining things,
oh, no
my
problem.
thoughts. But so the first thing I thought about is like reductionalism and how people like try to come to different conclusions on how something works based off of like the parts that it has. So taking something apart, and then if you can understand the simple like the parts of that whole thing, then you can be able to understand the whole thing. But what that does is it discounts how those parts interact with each other. So based off of that, I think that the body, mind, and the soul, or the spirit, I think they all interact in various ways, you know? I mean, especially on like your diagram. I'm trying to point this as COVID. COVID for you. But just like the links with all of them. Actually, like if you look in the center,
I'll see if I can zoom in a little bit.
yeah,
There we
if you
go.
look in the center, it looks like they kind of drip into each other.
Yeah.
And I think that just kind of like they all interact with each other on their own level with each other, you know, and but together it makes something, because you have to look at the parts independently and how two might interact with the other one, or how one might react with the other two. It's so much.
Yeah, and it really doesn't seem like it's really all that much looking at this diagram, but when you really get into like the nitty gritty, it's definitely a lot of stuff to like comprehend.
Yeah.
I think you're really onto something with the reductionist theory too, where like, yeah, we can look at the mind and like get everything we can understand about that, and then look at the body and get everything we can understand about that, and then the soul, the same thing. But what's more important is like how they interact all together to like create the life that we all experience.
Mm.
All right. See if I have anything for that. Nope. So, one thing I thought might be interesting for viewers to think about is that the New Catholic Encyclopedia argues that a non-physical mind and the mind-body interaction follow necessarily from the Catholic doctrines of the soul and free will. So that's just one way to like bring it back to like how it would affect like an everyday person, like how interactionism would be important to someone like John or Joe or anybody you can really think of. What? Actually, do you have anything?
Can you explain that a little more? So the Catholic Encyclopedia argues that non-physical mind and mind-body interaction follow necessarily from the Catholic doctrines. Okay, so can you explain what they mean by non-physical mind?
Oh yeah. So
So like not the brain.
yeah.
Okay, so not the brain and mind-body interaction. So how the actual mind, the non-physical mind or the brain?
the way I see it is, so for the mind-body interaction, the non-physical mind would be like, you could consider that our soul, and like how our soul affects our brain, because we're considering our brain to be part of our body.
Yeah. Okay.
So the question is like, how can something that doesn't have any like ability to move things or like no physical like appearance affect physical things? So there's actually a ton of objections to interactionism, and that's pretty much what the root of this episode's about, is just the objections. So let's just go ahead and dive right into that.
Okay.
So the first objection is the problem of causal interaction. How do the mental and the physical exert an impact on one another? Descartes' theory that interaction between the mind and the physical world occurred in the pineal gland was seen as inadequate by a number of philosophers in his era who offered alternative views. So Nicholas Malebranche, I might just call him NB just to not butcher his name, because I'd be pissed if someone was trying to say my name like that. He suggested occasionalism, and according to that, mind and body appear to interact, but are in fact moved separately by God. So, I mean, I guess I can just do this on here. So we can just say, like, this is the physical, and then underneath it is the mental. And let's say you get angry right here, and you decide to punch a wall or something physically. So what occasionalism is saying is like, pretty much when you punch the wall, that your God was making it so that you felt angry at that time, instead of like you got angry, therefore you punched the wall. It's saying that at the time you were angry, God was making you punch a wall. Then God, or do you have any comments on that one, or
Is this suggesting that the things that we feel, aka emotions, are a product of the mind, and the mind as a non-physical, and it comes out as a physical, like the energy is transferred into a physical action?
I think that's what Descartes trying to argue for in interactionalism. But for occasionalism, I think that it's pretty much like they never touch. Like my mind never has any control over my body. The person who's controlling everything is God up above. So I actually have some notes from my presenter notes to talk about here, just because of the way of occasionalism. So when I thought of occasionalism, it made me think about determinism. And determinism is the philosophical view that all events are determined completely by previously existing causes. And determinism is often taken to mean causal determinism, which in physics is known as cause and effect. It is the concept that events within a given paradigm are bound by causality in such a way that any state of an object or event is completely determined by prior states. So how that would apply to occasionalism is you don't really have a choice because it's already predetermined by God, like what's going to happen. So I think this way like kind of removes free will in a way.
Yeah, definitely.
God's making all your choices. How can you be responsible for anything? Okay. On the next point, got fried Leibniz. I'll just call him GL. Argued in one of his books that mind and body are in a pre-established harmony. So when I think of this, I just think of occasionalism, but instead of God like making the call, it's already decided. So like you could say, because somebody stepped on a butterfly in Japan today, I'm making this video because that happened. This is what has to happen. because it's already been established. Like I have no control over it.
You know, it's funny. In your example, you kind of gave me light to what that affected, the butterfly effect. Have you heard of that? Yeah, that's what that reminded me of.
Yeah, so that's what I think of when I think of like occasionalism or pre-established harmony, is that like because this happened, like there's nothing you can do about what's happening now because it's already been established.
Mm.
Okay, so on the other hand, Baruch Spinoza rejected Descartes' dualism and proposed that mind and matter were in fact properties of a single substance, thereby prefiguring the modern perspective of neutral monism. And so when I think of that, I think back to this slide over here with, I think he was saying substance with the same properties, right? Let me make sure. Yeah, properties of a single substance. So he would be more on the substance dualism side. I don't know. I feel like I'm confusing myself right now. So he says that are properties of a single substance. So that would have to be property dualism because they're the properties of the same substance. Substance dualism is that the substances are completely different. All right, my bad. I just had to get that straight in my head so I can at least explain my perspective on it.
No, this stuff is complicated, bro.
Right, so he rejected his dualism. I like to think, or at least this way of thinking about it is the easiest for me, just because it kind of eliminates the mind-body problem. But I don't know if it's right. It's definitely a hard question of is there just one substance that we're experiencing in this universe? Like, is this right now? Like, are my thoughts physical right now, or are they mental? And if they're mental, is that mentality like the part of the same substance, or is it a completely different substance to begin with? And I'd like to say that they're different substances, but then how do they like how does everything like work together? You know?
So I've actually I've thought about like this kind of stuff before. So just a little background. I majored in exercise science and psychology, so I kind of have knowledge of both the mind and body, and you know just how people behave and whatnot. So it's like on one side, I see like the science in the physical interaction. So like obviously neurons fire when you think, like your brain is active, like there's stuff going on up there. And it might be due to physical properties, like the actual chemicals firing for you to be able to have a thought, right? So I see that physical side of it, but then you also have to consider like the things that are not in our perception and what we can perceive, because humans are limited in how much they can actually like process, and most of the things that we do are just automatic, you know. So it's like, where does the automatic come from? And that led me to like energies, and there's energies that we can't see, lightweight or vibrations that we can't see, things we can't hear, like it's out of our perception, right? So we don't really know, we can't determine if it's that if we can't perceive it, right?
Yeah.
You can sure think there's something there though, but
can't really know until you know. And that's one of my favorite quotes. And I don't know how much it applies, but when you were saying that, it just made me think of it. Was that like once you experience a limit, you are beyond it, because you wouldn't be feeling limited if you weren't at the same time beyond the limit. And that just makes me think for this, where it's like, well, we don't know, but we know that we don't know. So that's at least a step in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Or
Right.
what if we don't know that we do know?
That's possible. That's I want to say like Hindu-y kind of, where like I think I don't want to say the Hindus because that don't sound politically correct, but like I know there's a
Nah, it doesn't.
denomination that believes that like we're all God, but we just forgot who we were. And I sometimes I like to think like that, where it's like, oh, I could be making millions of dollars right now. I just have a mental barrier that I don't even know about that's
Mm-hmm.
blocking me, but I don't know about it. So I can't really, beat the barrier. Um, I don't know how much that really applies to what we were just talking about, but
Everything's connected, bro. Everything.
all right. So we'll move from the problem of causal interaction to compatibility with conservation of energy.
Mm.
So the argument from physics argues that a mental substance impacting the physical world would contradict principles of physics. In particular, if some external source of energy is responsible for the interactions, it would violate the law of conservation of energy. So does that make sense?
The conservation of energy is.
All right, so I actually have notes on that. So in physics and chemistry, the law of conservation of energy states that the total energy of an isolated system remains constant. It is said to be conserved over time. This law, first proposed and tested by Emile de Chat, some person, means that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Rather,
Yeah.
it can only be transformed or transferred from one form to another.
Yes.
So actually, I feel like the explanation for the conservation of energy could be an explanation for like how the mind and body interact. So this is just like completely theoretical, but let's just say that like in order for a neuron to fire, you need an electrical impulse. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I know action potentials are like when you
Yep.
have build up and then like eventually you have to have a come down. So
Mm-hmm.
if we say that mental, like the non-physical mental is just like where the action potential decides to happen, I feel like that could maybe explain it, where it's instead of like the energy changing it, it's actually just being transformed into another form of like an electrical impulse to start an action potential.
Yeah, because there's okay there. Oh, this is really. I'm trying to think or remember action potentials and all of the little things that go into it. I know it's chemical. There's a threshold before an action potential goes off. Once it actually goes off, it has to fire all the way through. I think calcium's in there.
Yeah,
Maybe
calcium, potassium. I remember
maybe
that.
sodium. Maybe.
Yeah, sodium's in there too. Damn. I bet my teacher would be proud right now.
Low key. Yeah, no. But like, yeah, that's the chemical. I guess it just gets into, or at least I think it gets into like the interaction that the chemicals have.
Yeah.
And man, I, I just think about like their energy.
Yeah, I know at least for the action potential, it's like nature hates like a void. So like there'll be like so many of these particles inside the cell and then on the outside. And then eventually it reaches a threshold where some channels open and then all the like stuff on the outside of the cell comes inside and then that gives it like an electrical burst through the threshold or something.
Negative and pot. cations and anions. Yeah. No, this stuff is coming back. We're getting there. We're getting there.
It's coming together slowly but surely.
Yeah, no. Which is the two main?
Yeah, so the two main pro-interactionism responses to the compatibility with conservation of energy is to suggest the mind influences the distribution, but not the quantity of energy in the brain. So that's kind of what I was talking about, where let's say you're a cell and you have an action potential and it's not there yet. If the mind decides that, oh, I'll go with A instead of B, then if it was B, you wouldn't have got turned on. But because you chose A, like that, it doesn't change the quantity, but it changes the distribution, where if it was an A, it would go towards you, but if it was in B, it'd go somewhere else.
Interesting. Now, that actually just reminded me of a theory, cognitive psych theory, about like how we categorize things and how we like connect to things in the mind or in your brain. And I think it's called the spreading activation model. So like you think of like a fire truck, and anything that you know or have experienced in your life that is close to a fire truck will be slightly activated.
Yeah.
So that it's easier to reach.
Should you need that information?
Yeah.
That makes good. That's a good point, actually. I think that's I mean, when I thought of that, or when you were saying that, I was thinking about how sometimes, we don't use those connections and they just die off, they prune off.
Yeah.
So, it made me think of like, oh, how much do I really know about fire trucks, And I was like, I don't remember all that much. It's not really all that important to me, but, I wonder if belief in like interactionism versus like monism or something else like changes the way your brain like thinks, or not just thinks, or like how it like acts in relation to other things. Because beliefs are pretty important things if you really think about it. Like if I go outside and I believe that I'm invincible and I get hit by a car, we're gonna figure out one way or another if I'm invincible or not. And it's better to have like beliefs that are like realistic than ones that are, delusional. So then the second pro-interactionist response is to deny that the brain is a causally closed system. I gotta re-say that because that did not sound right coming out. To deny that the brain is a causally closed system in which conservation of energy would apply. So pretty much this argument kind of just moves the goalposts and says, oh, well, it just doesn't apply for the brain because the brain's special. Which, I mean, as far as we know, it is like it's the most complex thing we know, as far as I know. But I don't know that much.
Literally.
All right, so if I have any more notes on that, that's compatible with conservation of energy. All right, so we can move on to the next slide, which is another argument against interactionism, and this is the foremost argument. So like the argument that like gets called to most, and this is the argument for causal closure. And this argues that because physics fully accounts for the causes of all physical movements, there can be no place for a non-physical mind to play a role. Some philosophers have suggested the influence of the mind on the body could be reconciled with deterministic physical laws by proposing the mind's impacts instead take place at points of quantum indeterminacy. So I actually have a lot of notes on this slide because this slide's pretty much the meat of this conversation, really. So I actually So for my notes here, I just kind of explained like all these in like words that normal people would say. And I'll just start with those now. So for my notes, I have some philosophers suggest mind-body interaction can be compatible with deterministic laws by proposing the mind's impact takes place at points of quantum indeterminacy. And quantum indeterminacy is the apparent necessary incompleteness in the description of a physical system. So prior to quantum physics, it was thought that a physical system had the determinate state, which is uniquely determined by all the values of its measurable properties, and that the values of those measurable properties uniquely determine the state. This can be qualitatively characterized by a probability distribution on the set of outcomes of measurements of an observable object. So I think it's important to note here too that indeterminacy in measurement is not an innovation of quantum mechanics, because it's been established early on by experimentalists that errors in measurement may lead to indeterminate outcomes, which, I mean, that makes sense. If you're not measuring everything the same way, it makes sense that you would have different numbers. Like if I'm measuring in centimeters and you're measuring in inches, and I say there's 6, we're gonna get completely different numbers or completely different things.
Mm-hmm.
However, by the later half of the 18th century, measurement errors were well understood, and it was known that they could either be reduced by better equipment or accounting for them with statistical error models. However, in quantum mechanics, indeterminacy is much more fundamental in nature, and it has nothing to do with like errors or disturbances. So I think this theory or argument against interactionism is probably one of the better ones, just because I like the way it like explains things away. So one way it explains things away is by saying that it's pretty much all like probability what will happen. And they're saying that the mind, or there is no mind, so it's all just based off like probability of what is going on, or like what measurements or how much of one particular substance there is over another. And these are on, like your brain on the micro versus macro level. I don't know if I explained that well. So if you have any questions, just let me know and I'll try my best to explain it better.
I think for the most part, I'm understanding what you're saying. Can I regurgitate it? Let's see. You said the sum of basically all of, let's say action potential, like the quantity of those. Fuck it. There's so much there, bro.
Yeah, I know.
I think I couldn't throw it back at you, but I think I got it for the most part.
Yeah, just for this one, just understand quantum indeterminacy is just like a probability system, kind of, where you're just figuring out, based on, there's this many clouds in the sky, it might rain.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
That might have been a good example for that.
Examples help a lot.
So Karl Popper and John Eccles, as well as the well-known physicist Henry Stapp, have theorized that such indeterminacy may apply at the macroscopic scale. So here I just try to give like an explanation of like microscopic versus macroscopic. So how am I going to do this? So for, let's just say my finger here, microscopically, there's a lot of electrons in my finger somewhere. I don't know where, but I know that they're there. Macroscopically would be like, consider the whole finger in relation to everything else in really the atmosphere that I'm in. But even the atmosphere where you're at, where maybe my finger has like a slight gravitational pull on the cup you've been drinking out of or something, Something weird like that. Okay, so.
Oh, okay. Okay.
For this, I'm a little bit ahead of myself there. But in relation to this, yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have on there for now. I know it gets a little different once we bring David Chalmers in. So David Chalmers has noted without necessarily endorsing a second possibility within quantum mechanics that consciousness causal role is to collapse the wave function as per the von Neumann Wagner interpretation, or the consciousness causes collapse. So let me see if I can do this. I don't know if I'll be able to do it with lines or anything. I'll just make a couple boxes. All right, that's not gonna work. That is not gonna work. I wish I could just like, maybe I can pull up like a probability sheet or something. But the main thing about what David Chalmers is saying is that like consciousness causes the probability field to collapse because it makes it go from 800 or 800,000 different possibilities into one. So I think this is like the best argument against interactionalism, or maybe a better way to put it than to say that everything happens in your pineal gland. Because with this, it's saying that like once you consciously choose something, then there's only so many possibilities that could happen, instead of saying that, oh, instead of saying, I don't know, did you understand at least what I was saying there, where consciousness causes the probability field to collapse?
After you said once you consciously make a decision or like decide something,
Yeah.
then I understood.
I know I'm sorry, what were you gonna say?
So like you can be like weighing the pros and cons of a situation, but as soon as you like come to the conclusion that there's more cons than there are pros, then you'll avoid that situation or something like that. Like
Yeah.
that you seeing that there's more cons destroys the possibility of you doing anything, destroys the possibility of like you continuing with that event or whatever you were weighing out.
And then to add on to that, when you destroy that possibility, it makes you more likely to do something else. So that's just how I think of it, as like, you know, it's like a grid with a bunch of dots. I'm gonna see if I can find, I'm gonna look up the exact word. Maybe I can find something on wave functions or something. You can still see my screen, right?
Yeah.
All right. Let's just see if I can find. Not liking it. If I just get rid of wave function, I guess I can work with this. Didn't mean to do all that though. All right, so I guess my way of doing this will just be here. So let's say the options are your probability of eating a banana. So let's say you happen to like the color yellow. So you'd be more likely to be over in this range of doing the banana, where if you like the color red, you'd be more likely to find an apple or something red, and you'd be over here where you wouldn't like necessarily be inclined to go get a banana. And you know, I'd say like when you're here, you're like deciding things like, oh, this is where you're doing like a pro con analysis of, oh, maybe if I eat this banana, I need the potassium because I've been cramping up all day. Or that would like make it more likely to say you're over here a little bit more. And then like you can keep doing this and this and this until eventually you hit like one of these markers, and then you've made the decision to get a banana or get an apple or whatever. You think that was a decent explanation, or?
No, yeah, that made sense.
Okay. So David Chalmers notes that there is some irony in the fact that philosophers reject interactionism on largely physical grounds. It is incompatible with physical theory, while physicists reject interactionism, interactionalist interpretation of quantum mechanics on largely philosophical grounds of it being dualistic. And he thinks that when you take both of those things together at the same time, they carry little like force, or like they don't really make an argument for either side really. And I think that's at least a little spot on. I know at least with this, if at least if interactionism is right, then everything isn't like purely physical, like then there's something else other than like what's going on in life that we can physically see. But if it's false and physicists are right, then the fact that they think that there's like a mind outside of the physical, it just makes no sense because they can't account for it. So it's just, there's different sides you can choose. I choose to be dualistic because it's hard for me to say that I have like no control over what happens to my body, at least. I kind of want to spend more time to make sure like people understand the collapse of the wave function. So I'm gonna try and explain it again. I wish I could find a better picture. Maybe this one will be a little better. Maybe I can make a better example from this. So for this outcome, so instead of having 1, 2, 3, and 4, the outcome could be like apple, banana, orange, grape. And let's say you had a grape yesterday, so you don't want grapes. So you'd be less likely or less probable to get grapes and more probable to get one of the other 3. And that's the same thing with quantum mechanics, where it closes the field of, because I had the grape yesterday, I no longer want grapes today. So I'm not going to be probable to get a grape. I don't know.
What you just said reminds me of something you said earlier about like what happens next is determined by your state before.
Oh yeah.
Like your previous state.
Yeah. Kind of wish this shit would go away. I don't know how to make it go up. All right, there we go. What was that? I don't think that was here.
No, that's pretty early on.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, especially with this, because like it's not probable that someone in Japan would be the president of the United States, just because of where they're at. And because of the pre-existing state of them living in Japan, their odds or their probability of becoming the next president of the United States changes, like, and it drops drastically.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he's trying to get over, or David Chalmers is trying to say, is that like, because of where you're at consciously, or yeah, pretty much consciously, like it collapses your possibility to be somewhere else or something else because you're there.
Where you are consciously.
I think that's true even outside of the view of interactionism, where like if I'm consciously in like a very agitated state, I'm not gonna want to be like, I'm not gonna want to sit down and play with puppies. I'm gonna want to do something about my anger, like do something to relieve that tension from myself.
All right, I'm about to mess you up really quick, bro.
All right.
So you said states, right?
Yeah.
So there's a state that's basically your state is determined. It's an interaction between your environment and who you are as a person, or your traits, right?
Yeah.
And traits are generally pretty stable over time, at least what research has shown. So I guess what I was getting at is like, oh, dang, this stuff can get lost so easily. If your current state, if your current state is, if your current state affects any state after that, then what or how do your traits affect that state? That, oh, hold on. What, okay, your traits though, I feel like your traits can influence the probability of, like if you're a person that is more likely to be upset, like you have a short fuse.
Yeah.
And that's just like, that's just always been you, right? Like, how does that affect your, that affects like your state, because there's an interaction between those two. And then I guess we have to figure out what category do we lump traits into. Now, would you say that's your brain or your mind, your non-physical mind?
I'd say your traits would probably be, yeah, your non-physical mind, because I want to say that a lot of your traits are like learned behaviors. So it would make more sense to say it's your mind than your soul, because at least the way I see it is like your soul can't, I mean, it can be like touched by like what you've learned, but like, I mean, what your soul does is pretty much just interpret, right? Or at least that's how I see it, is your soul interprets, your soul interprets your interpretation from your mind, and then your mind interprets your body, and then maybe your body just interprets like the signals your brain gives, and then like sends that feedback back. Kind of, I think it's a loop, but
Everything's a loop.
when I think of traits, I think of like beliefs, because at least my personal philosophy on like traits is that like you can change and like you can do whatever you really want to as long as you put the work in. So like someone with a short fuse could like learn patience over time if they really wanted to make the effort to. But I mean, I'm sure there's scientific research somewhere like showing me wrong, saying that like no, if you were born with like a short fuse, like hot tempered, you're gonna be that way for the rest of your life. There's nothing you can do about it. You know, like try to like reduce the effects of it rather than like change the thing.
A lot of this conversation brings me back to this class that I took my senior year at North Central. It was called The Dark Side of Evolution. Very interesting class, but we basically kind of got into a lot of these theories and just kind of like we're critically analyzing science and just the process throughout time and whatnot. But yeah, this stuff brings back a lot of dark memories of just being mind blown every class period. Just
Yeah, this stuff is mostly from my philosophy of mind class. That class really, I remember I used to tell you a lot of shit about that class.
yeah, we used to have some good ass conversations.
Just trying to keep that.
What's that?
I'm just trying to keep that going with like these videos and stuff.
Yeah.
Like I like talking about this stuff, and it's really nice and like interesting to me to like hear other people's perspectives on it. So that's kind of why I'm doing these videos, not only to like make it understandable, because like I enjoy hearing people's side of things.
No, bro, this is awesome. I appreciate you doing this.
Oh yeah, I appreciate you doing this. So this is the last slide.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure this slide just goes over different like viewpoints. I got 2 more notes in my presentation notes about this, and then we'll be all done. So another possible resolution for interactionism, and it's kind of akin to parallelism, is a view that Eugene Mills holds, and he says that behavioral events are causally overdetermined and can be explained by either physical or mental causes alone. And an overdetermined event is fully accounted for by multiple causes at once. And I have some notes on overdeterminism because when I first read that, I didn't know what the fuck it was. So overdeterminism occurs when a single observed effect is determined by multiple causes, any of which alone would be sufficient to account for / determine the effect. That is, there are more causes present than are necessary to cause the effect. In the philosophy of science, this means that more evidence is available than is necessary to justify a conclusion. So how does that relate to the philosophy of mind? Behavioral events are causally overdetermined and can be explained in either physical or mental states. So I think at least when I read that, it makes me think that or when I see it, overdeterminism would be like if you're about to like long jump or something, like you're wearing the long jump spikes, you're at the end of the runway, you've warmed up, all these events like make it so that like if it like sorry, I'm saying that a lot.
I'm following.
You're following?
I'm following.
There's more evidence to like prove that you're going to long jump than there is that you're not. And
Yeah.
I think I didn't really like overdeterminism as a view just because it's a little confusing because it kind of just seems like a reiteration of something we just talked about earlier.
No, I counted 2 things that we brought up recently that reminded me of.
Yeah. What were you thinking then?
The probability, what was it, the indeterminate something?
Oh yeah, let me see, indeterminacy.
Yeah, that and the whole state, your previous state.
Oh yeah, state's conversation too.
Yeah. So like once you actually get on the runway, like there's more of a probability that you're gonna perform a long jump than not.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it too. And an indeterminate event, like let's say you bailed, like that would already have been something that had happened before, like you made the decision to. And I think overdeterminism, just because like there was probably more, like you probably like when you took off, you felt like it was wrong or you felt weird, and that made it so like there was more of a reason for you to not want to jump than for jumping, even though you've already warmed up and did all that stuff. Like when you're making a run through and like shit just doesn't feel right.
Mm-hmm.
You go to like do your actual attempt and it still doesn't feel right, so you like just bail. That's what I think of when I think of that, or what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm actually like, even though I like sensed like similarities between those that we just talked about, I still am not exactly sure what overdetermined, what they mean by that. So like there's multiple causes at once. So for a given situation to happen, event to happen, there are multiple things that influence it or have to influence it to happen, right?
I think, or at least my understanding is, like there would be like multiple things that could have made it that way. So
Possibilities.
yeah, multiple possibilities of like ways that could have happened. So let's say a football player just like broke his leg and he just got in a car crash. Like those two things could be like a reason why his legs hurt. Or yeah, let's say he got in a biking accident, he got in a car crash, and then he just played in a football game. Those are
Mhm.
all reasons why his legs could hurt. And like so it's overdetermined that his legs gonna hurt because he was involved with all these different things that could have hurt his leg.
I get it. I get it. I get it. Okay. That made sense. I see it now, and I see it now.
I'm glad because I feel
That
sorry, go ahead.
that makes me just think that all the events that that person did, those three events, make it makes it more probable for his leg to hurt, not necessarily to say that it was the, because you can't determine the cause of it. So it's over determined because of the amount of possibilities or the amount of things that could have made his leg hurt.
Yeah. Yeah.
The multiple things that could have made that like made sense but didn't. Oh, this is okay. I see what you're saying about this one.
At least when I think of this, it makes me think of like what my parents taught me, where it's like, don't put yourself in a situation where you wouldn't be able to like get out of it pretty much. So if you don't want to get hurt, don't put yourself in situations that can make you in pain. So like don't try to like stop a robber or like don't get your ass whooped.
Now, what happens if you're put in a situation that you didn't know was gonna let's see, too many questions.
I think if you're put in a situation where it doesn't seem like it's overdetermined, it was probably already overdetermined. You just didn't get all the information to like understand that it was overdetermined, that you didn't have a choice. So that I think overdeterminism is a form of determinism where you just don't have free will. Like whatever happens is gonna happen. And
Faith. Yeah.
okay, and then so JJ.C. Smart and Paul Churchland have argued that if physical phenomena fully determine behavioral events, then by Occam's razor, a non-physical mind is unnecessary. All right, so I had to look up Occam's razor because uh, that's just jargon, really. And you could really just explain it by, or I'll just read my notes on it. So Occam's razor is the problem-solving principle that entities should not be multiplied without necessity, or more simply, the simplest explanation is usually the right one.
Mm.
This philosophical razor advocates that when presented with competing hypotheses about the same prediction, one should select the solution with the fewest assumptions, and that this is not meant to be a way of choosing between hypotheses that make different predictions. So I guess through Occam's razor, if everything is already like physically determined like beforehand, then there's really no reason to say that we have a non-physical mind because it just adds an extra step that's not necessary for the goal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. And so this dude Andrew M argues that overdetermination would require an intolerable coincidence. And I think what he's trying to get at there is like if you have an over deterministic view on life, like you're saying that like, oh, it's a coincidence that my legs broke, even though I just ran a mile and or deadlifted or squatted like 6,000 pounds or some shit, and I think that an intolerable coincidence is a great way to like put that because everything just kind of happens by coincidence, even if like you have no say really. I feel like I just said the same shit twice. Let me see if I can try to explain it better. One way I think a good example would be like how Trump made it to president. Like he didn't just fall into it. Like it wasn't just coincidence. Like he had to like take steps to like make sure that happened.
Mhm.
But overdeterminism would say that that happened even though, or those steps were like made it overdetermined, but it's a coincidence that it happened.
Uh,
And I think what Andrew M is trying to say that like maybe if it's always like a coincidence that these things happen, maybe that we make those coincidences happen, so then they're not coincidence, they're like actually directed thought.
yeah, I felt like that just undid everything.
Yeah, that made a lot more sense.
Yeah, it did make sense, but like, I guess the overdetermination was undone by the intolerable coincidence. Because like, if everything is just coincidence, then you don't really have autonomy,
Yeah,
and your decisions aren't your decisions. Your conscious decisions um aren't because you they're not even conscious at that point.
like, it just happens.
It's just
Coincidence. It's just a coincidence that me and you had this talk today. Like it wasn't like my decision or your decision. It just happened just because. And it's just coincidence.
I don't know. Part of that kind of like it messes with me though, because it almost feels like if everything is a coincidence, but somehow you still end up doing the necessary steps to get to see, especially if someone like makes a goal. Like for me, when I make goals for myself, like to get to a certain thing,
Yeah.
a lot of the times okay, no, okay. A lot of the time I won't, sometimes I don't come up with the steps in my head before. I don't plan the steps ahead. It just kind of, sometimes I just get to that goal based off my own will, and I just do the things that I think will happen or that I need to do to get to that point. But it seems a little weird because like there are specific steps that you need to take to become president, right?
Yeah. Like,
And how can all those things be
yeah. Like
coincidence?
my argument against overdeterminism at least would be like Donald Trump didn't just, it isn't a coincidence that he's president. Like he obviously had to want to be president. And like continue to, because he had multiple chances to just like leave if he wanted to, you know? So it's not a coincidence, it's determined effort. And I don't know if determined is the right word to say there, but like it's conscious like effort towards that. And if they're saying that, well, they're saying it can be either physical or mental causes alone. So I guess you could say he mentally wanted to, and then there was no physical, like he had no physical want, like need for it. It was just all mental. I don't know.
I think this is hard because we're discounting a lot of other influences.
Yeah.
We're, could we say that we're over determining an event? Because I mean, for him to get to that point, there's also a ton of interactions that could happen between him and other people, and who knows what's going on in someone else's head. So like that interaction in their head led to an interaction with him, which sparked another interact. You see, like it's so much that you'd have to.
I think when you were saying that, I thought of an example for like at least the president where like in order to be like the nominee for president, you have to like speak at certain rally and like get this support or like get people support in this. So like once you have the support and you spoke at the rally and you're like on the ballot and you have more votes than anybody else, then you're president. So like those four things like make it overdetermined for someone to be president. I don't know if that was a good example.
I think we've saturated this one.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me do my outro real quick. So if you made it this far, you probably like this type of content, and thank you so much for watching. Please like this video and give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel for new content as soon as I can get it out. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Kyle signing off. Okay, how do I turn this off? Meeting.